and welcome to another episode of Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. Unexpected is a whole lot more fun than inclusion and diversity, and we'll probably get to a lot of that today anyway. Our guest is Kiefer Jones. Kiefer is 32 years old, so his bio says. He was in the Air Force. He's faced some physical challenges along the way. I think it was all just to get attention, but he can tell us about it. It was, I know, that was no fun, was it, Kiefer? But anyway, I want to welcome you to Unstoppable Mindset. We're really glad you're here.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you so much for having me. Happy to be a guest, and I've been looking forward to this all week, sir.
Well, tell me a little bit about maybe the younger Kiefer growing up and all that, and sort of how you got started or whatever.
Ooh, yeah, that was.
I know that opens it. That takes an hour, but go to it.
No, yeah. So, what can I say? I'm a small town Indiana kid. I grew up in a tiny little town called Decatur, Indiana. It's a one stoplight town. I am the oldest son of three boys and a single mother, so a single mom household. Yeah, grew up there and started off my life in this tiny one-stop town where eventually we moved to Indianapolis. And I finished out high school. So that was quite a turn of, I think, environments. Went to Indianapolis, finished high school. And after that, decided, wow, I'd need a much better way to pay for college and try to figure out the next phase of life. And so that brought me to the Air Force. And the Air Force since then led to a lot of different opportunities. But that's the real skinny of where I'm from and just kind of, that upbringing.
Well, there you go. What was it like having a single parent? I mean, I never did. I had both my parents until, well, I was 34, so I was out on my own and married by them. But what was it like having just a single mother and not a dad around?
Absolutely. That's a great question. It's one that, I got to reflect on a little bit in one of these topics I'm sure we're going to talk on. But that was one of the early challenges I think I faced. And it was something that I'll be honest and kind of say it's almost that old saying that if you can't miss something that you never had. And so I think that just as a child, that's the way that it was to me. People ask me that question all the time, and I didn't miss what I didn't have. And so I met my biological father much later in life when I was 27 years old, Michael. But during, growing up and everything else, it was something that just
wasn't there
because I didn't have it. Yeah. So it was, I was grateful for what I did have.
What was it like meeting him?
It was, it was curiosity was the biggest thing. It was, nurture nature, kind of those setting some of those arguments to the side and trying to figure that out. And I will say I had no expectations, and I showed up and we met each other, and he's very different from myself, and his family's very different, and it was enlightening. It was good, but it really, I would say that at the end of the day, it also didn't. It was nice to get some of those, I guess, those curiosities checked off the box.
Yeah.
And outside of that, it was just kind of another day. We keep in contact lightly. I'll shoot him a message every now and again during the holidays or something, but it's not a relationship that either of us, I think, have and continue to maintain.
Yeah. And I'm not surprised at that. One of my biggest curiosities, the question that I get asked all the time is, well, you're blind. Don't you want to see? And my response to that is, life's an adventure, and having eyesight for me now would be another adventure, but I don't live just to get eyesight. I'm curious. It'd be interesting to experience it, to know what it's like. But if it doesn't happen, it's not the end of the world for me. And I believe that all of us are not, well, we're not formed and we're not molded by our eyesight or lack of eyesight. We're molded by all sorts of different characteristics about us. And I would like to think that if I had eyesight from the beginning, I would still be somewhat like I am. And if I got eyesight even after now, I wouldn't change my attitudes, because I think I've learned a lot about what it's like to see without actually having experienced it. So
Yeah,
it's kind of a fascinating thing, but I hear exactly what you're saying. It's,
absolutely.
it's a curiosity and you got to satisfy that, which is great. Is your mom still around?
She is indeed. Yeah, she still lives very near the same town where I grew up at. So
And she keeps you honest.
she does indeed. Yeah, keeps me
You
honest. She taught me, to be good to people and to be kind.
well, you get it from two sides because you're now married.
That's
And
absolutely correct.
your wife's name is
Her name is Christine.
Christine. Okay.
Yeah, but she goes by Teen. We
That's
say
what I was going to
it's
say. She goes by Teen, I thought, but
yeah, or the Chris
cool.
is silent, as we
The Chris
say.
is
She's
silent
my
in Christine. Yeah.
that's it. She's my better half.
Well, and she keeps you honest, which is kind of cool.
Oh
Well,
yeah.
so you went to high school and did you go to college?
So I went to a year of college, Michael, and that's when I found out that I could not pay for it. And so
Mm.
that's when I said, how are we going to make this happen? How are we going to address this obstacle, this challenge? And the Air Force seemed like a really great opportunity, a good place to get that opportunity.
So you joined the Air Force, and what did you go off and do in the Air Force?
Yes, sir. Joined the Air Force, and I came in as what they call a client systems technician. And so I started my career in the Air Force working on computers, any end user device with an IP address. That was the work that I got to work on.
So, did you fly yourself or what?
That one is the common question. Hey, Air Force guy, you fly, right? No, so
I did.
that
Well,
was
that's why I asked because I kind of got the feeling that you weren't one of the ones that sat behind the stick.
no, sir. No, I was the guy who helped, fix his computer, fix his email, get into his server, whatever he or she needed. That's what I helped do.
My father worked for the government for many years as a contractor. He ran the precision measurements equipment lab at Edwards Air Force Base
Wow.
in the well, in the 1960s and in the 1970s. So he worked with all of the test pilots and stuff. He worked with Neil Armstrong, Joe Walker, who flew the X-15 and other things like that. And his job was to make sure that everybody uh, who worked for him made sure that all the equipment and everything worked the way it was supposed to, which was a fascinating job. We went out and visited Edwards a few times. It was really funny. We went out once and my dad came out and said, "You can't come in quite yet. We've got some top secret equipment and you can't come into the lab." And I said, "Why is that an issue for me?" And he said, "Well, it is anyway." So,
Right. That's a good point. And it's, if you don't ask, the answer is always no.
yeah. Well, and I didn't mind, but and it was fun to be able to ask the question, and he laughed at it, and when we got inside, everybody else laughed too, and they said we could have let you in, and my dad said, "Well, the rules are the rules, and I'm
That's
not going to
it.
complain." Yeah, which is
You're right.
cool.
That is a fascinating thing. It doesn't, often specify in that. It doesn't talk about, people having visual disabilities and those things. It's just here's the policy. You either have the clearance or you don't, right?
So you you worked on the computers, you kept everybody going and all that. You must have some really interesting stories of challenges or things that you faced when you did that, or any kind of cute stories to tell. Not to
I
give away
mean,
secrets, but just fun stories.
no, no. I mean, we did some really incredible work. I would say that the most rewarding part of my entire Air Force career was when, I had the ability and the opportunity to deploy. And
Mm.
so when I did that, I was able to go out into, the Al Dhafra in the United Arab Emirates, and we got to be a really large part of the connective tissue of the Air Force. It was, hey, not only is this the system that you're integrating onto this network, but this is how it's, helping us utilize command and control capabilities to fight enemies and do operations. And that was just such a really really neat experience, and it helped be the adhesive glue for my career and say, wow, okay, I'm not just fixing so and so's email. This solution that we put in over here, this was some really incredible work.
That made a big difference and did help place the glue that held everything together. And that makes perfect sense. And that really shows that no matter what your job is, all jobs are valuable. And we
Exactly.
should never look down on or treat anyone differently just because their job isn't what we think is as important as our job, because the bottom line is it very well could be.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, everybody, it's just all about the perspective lens we're looking at it through.
So you were in the Air Force for what, 7 years?
Yes, sir. No, I'm sorry.
Oh, you
Jeez.
were you were in Europe for 7 years.
Europe for 7.5 years. And yeah, I was in the Air Force for about, I think, just around 9 years, almost at the 10-year marker.
So what happened at the end of 7 years in Europe?
It's a bit of a strange story there. So I went to Europe as an Air National Guardsman. That's what I originally was. I was the guy who showed up, did my job once a month, and I worked for civilian companies regularly. So I worked for Dell and Eli Lilly previously. And
Mm.
then so they brought me to Europe on this interesting tour that said, hey, this is a state budget, not a federal budget. And for you National Guard guys, because we know you have commercial experience, we want to utilize you to help the Air Force over here to make it better. And so I got to work probably 5 different jobs by the time I was done in Germany and got out of the uniform. And within that 3.5 years we were in Germany, I met a really great program manager for this exciting company that I hadn't heard of called Agile Defense. And
Oh,
at that time, he said, hey, I would love for you to come and join us, join our team. I think you'd be a great asset for our company. And that kicked me off into my role as a government contractor. And it brought us for another interesting assignment in Aviano, Italy. And so that's where, we had spent the rest of our European adventure and stayed out there for almost 7.5 years total in Europe altogether, coming back to America just this June, actually.
wow.
Yeah.
And then you left the Air Force, it's
Hmm.
eventually, and then what happened? What did you do then?
So I left the Air Force, and because I got to take off the uniform and pretty much show back up the next day as a contractor, it was I just took the uniform off and came back in, the khakis and a polo or something, and started my job in Aviano, Italy. And once I became a government contractor, my role was similar but different. So I worked instead of reporting directly to the folks in the military uniforms, the Air Force members. I got to work beside them as their peer, as their consultant, as their advisor for their technological solutions and to help maintain those. And I helped manage a data center at Aviano, Italy, and got to help them and integrate well with their operations along the way, picking up interests and becoming passionate in business agility and some of the agile frameworks.
Did it feel a lot different since you were no longer reporting directly to the military? And it had to be a little bit different feeling.
Oh yeah, it was. And it took me a little bit to find my ground, I
Uh-huh.
think, just to walk in through the door and say, okay, and it was that amount of freedom, I think, was a little bit liberating to come in through the door and say, oh, I'm I know what I need to do. I know what my job is. I know what my requirements are. And so I just go and I do that rather than waiting for someone to tell me what to do. And especially because this happened at the same time as COVID, it was especially
Oh,
interesting
yeah.
because I was the first government contractor to Aviano, Italy. And so I truly was there kind of on my own, just saying, hey, not only am I approaching this change in career, but now change in reality and life at the moment with the lockdowns and different things happening. And Italy was just so heavily afflicted by the throes of the
Mhm.
pandemic, and probably arguably more than many of the European countries because their age demographic was much older. So
Mhm.
a lot of unique and interesting challenges in the year of 2019, 2020, not just for me, but for everyone.
Yeah. It had to be unusual. For me, when COVID hit, um, I was in New York on the 5th of March of 2020, and I had a speech to give that night, which I did. And then I went back to the hotel and I was hearing about this guy who attended a synagogue and he had this disease, COVID, and it was spreading and all that. And they were talking about locking down the city. And I went, I don't like this. So I
Yeah.
was scheduled to fly out the next afternoon at like 4:30 or 5 o'clock. And I went, I'm not going to do that. If they're going to lock down the city, I better escape. So I changed my flight and I went out at 7:30 in the morning. And I'm glad I did. I got out before they locked down the city. And
Oh my
uh,
gosh.
it was a couple of days later, but it could have been not. And so it was good to just get out. But it was a strange feeling. And I came home, and my wife, who was still alive at the time, had rheumatoid arthritis. So that's an autoimmune disease situation. So it made it easier to just stay home, and travel was cut off pretty quickly anyway. But it was easy to stay home because I didn't want to do anything that would jeopardize her, of course. And so we both just agreed to lock down and stay at home. And we liked each other well enough that we could talk, and we just spent lots of time together, and all went well. And I learned a lot about Zoom and learned how to do podcasting, and that was very helpful later on. But the bottom line is, yeah, it was certainly a tough time for all of us. And the only thing that I find very unfortunate is so many people refused to mask when they went out. And I think that they contributed greatly to the number of people who caught COVID and perished from it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was just one of those things, but everybody makes their own choices.
Yes, sir.
And then you go deal with that. Well, so then so you came back from Italy this year?
This June. Yes,
Wow.
I got it here in the summertime.
Now, when did you and Teen get married?
Teen and I got married. We will have been married 7 years on the 21st of this month.
And do either of you speak Italian well?
We both do, actually.
Good for you.
Yep, we both learned German as well. So we took 3 years of German while we were there, and that was really challenging. But in Italy, it was, we knew the drill, we knew what we needed to do. And so it was not only easier because we spent a lot of time learning the German language, but now it was easier because Italian as a whole is a much simpler language. German is very challenging as far as structure and rules. So
yeah, I love what Mark Twain said about German, which is basically that you start talking and you talk until a verb comes out at the other end.
Yeah.
I took 3 years of German in high school, so I understood that. But yeah. Well, so you came back, and what do you do now?
Yeah, so now I still work with the same great company. It's Agile Defense, and I actually support another Air Force agency called the Air Force Office of Scientific Research. So they're my primary customer and our primary customer at the moment. At the same time, I spend a lot of time, supporting my wife's business because we both co-own a multimedia company called Tiki Design Productions. And so I'm usually pretty busy.
Cool. Well, tell me about the company. What do you do?
Yeah, so my wife started this back in Germany because she went to Indiana University as a film student. And she graduated, and almost right after graduation, we moved to Germany. And because she just couldn't go up to a film agency and say, hey, can I work here? Because that just isn't the way it works with the SOFA agreement and everything else. We decided to start our own endeavor there. And, you put Teen plus Kiefer together, chop off some of the letters, and it becomes Tiki. So that was actually coined by my mother. And so we created Tiki Design Productions.
I thought that was cute.
Yeah. And so with that company, we provide what we like to call digital storytelling as a service.
Mm-hmm.
And so digital storytelling as a service is essentially, everybody has a story to tell. As you have me on this amazing podcast to tell my story. And I loved reading and hearing about yours. And digital storytelling is now, because everything is so digitally involved, phones, computers, tablets, et cetera. Everybody has these incredible stories, whether you're an individual or a business partner or a mom and pop shop down the street. And so our job is to not only get to hear your story, but then to tell it in a way that is emotional and captivating and cohesive, not just another business sticker or placement. We truly pride ourselves on being able to tell people's stories in an authentic and unique way. And that's been really rewarding.
So what do you do to really bring a story alive when you're doing a digital storytelling? What brings the story to people? What draws them in to the story?
Absolutely. So we spend some time at first, getting to interview those folks. We get to interview the people or the person that is, that has hired us for a service, and we spend a good amount of time getting their emotions and getting what really, makes them passionate about what they do. And so through that investigative, mindset, through inquisitiveness, through all of these things, we can then start to put ideas behind some of these videos and some of these stories, and we work collaboratively with them to say, hey, this is what we're envisioning, right? And my wife has such a wonderful eye and wonderful gift to talk to people. And even if it's something as, she did this recently for something like real estate. It sounds on paper, it's not the sexiest, shiniest thing, right? It doesn't sound that incredible. And somehow she's able to ask enough questions and the right questions to grab this story, shape it into, anywhere between a 3-minute long commercial or a 7-minute long commercial or something like that. And just the way, filming is done, the way that she films, the color grading, all of these professional qualities that she puts behind it, she turns it into an unbelievable product. And people often, when they're done, they can't believe that she was able to tell their story in such a
Yeah.
significant light. It's something that, they're really proud of, which in turn it makes us really proud.
So many people just don't understand that everyone really does have a story to tell. I've had so many
Yes.
people say, well, if I come on your podcast, I don't know what I talk about because my story is not interesting. It's not like these other people who have these interesting and amazing careers. And it is so difficult to get people to understand that everyone has a story and
Right.
that the stories are there. It is a matter of helping to draw them out,
Mm-hmm.
but they're there. So what do people why do they engage Tiki to do that? What is the whole idea behind digital storytelling?
I think we touched on it just a little bit, but it's that you have a desire to tell your story. At the end of the day, we all want to have our story told, and we'd like it to live somewhere. And previously it was books and a lot of people putting their stories and memoirs into books, but with digital media being the new norm and consumption being done through the internet, it just seems like this is the natural next step is what is our digital story? What's our footprint and our legacy look like in
Yeah.
the digital realm? And so people come to us for that.
So how do people use the stories that you create?
Oh, they'll use them. We'll see everything from, people just wanting to to tell a story about their first date of how they met their loved ones, and they'll post it on Facebook to share with people that they know and love. And you'll see others, utilizing business commercials, and they'll promote that either on whether it's, uh, Facebook, Instagram, social media, any of those form factors, but as well as internet ads on YouTube or television. So it can go as small or as deep as anybody likes.
Wow. What's the longest story that you've created?
I think that a lot of those, as far as length is concerned, it normally that one is almost always like wedding videos.
Mm,
So a lot of people, they love those stories, and I think that with those, you spend a whole day capturing footage
yeah,
and being able to tell that kind of story, and it's a special one to tell.
it
And
is.
usually, people, that one's a lot more for the memories, I think, of those folks rather than it is for everyone else to sit and watch it. Because even businesses, don't typically want a 20-minute long
No,
commercial or want their story to be told for that long. So I'd have to say, I think weddings.
that yeah, a 20-minute story is a long story, especially for business people who operate in the mindset that anything beyond a 30 or a 60-second video, people will lose attention. And I'm not
Exactly.
totally sure about that, but I understand 20 minutes is way too long too. It's all in how you tell the story as to how long you can make it and keep people's interest.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to that why value of, okay, well, who's it for? Who are we making it for? And what do you want to get out of this? And with wedding videos, I think it's
Well,
become their
that's, yeah,
version of a scrapbook.
very much so. And
Hmm.
that makes sense. Well, so you do that. So do you do company work? Well, how much of your time do you spend doing it?
It just depends, everything in art seems to be feast and famine. You get a little bit, and sometimes you've got a lot of different clientele and different things to do, and sometimes it's not so much.
Yeah.
So I get to ebb and flow my time pretty well, but there's at least there's always something to be done. If it's not directly helping to service or to help my wife with something, we go into, okay, well, what's our next marketing strategy look
Yeah.
like from
Yeah.
our company? Okay, how do we promote ourselves? Where do we go, and who do we target to be able to continue
And,
doing it?
and did you say you still do the government contract work?
Yes, sir. Five
So
days a week.
you keep pretty busy.
Yes, sir.
And have they wanted
And
you to come and do a digital story about the company yet?
well, because this is, the Air Force Office of Scientific Research has its own PR department.
Yeah, I
So
know.
they don't really ask me to do any of that.
Well, you never know.
Yeah.
Something to think about. Well, so you and your wife clearly have a very good and close relationship, and I think that's important.
Yes,
And we
sir.
got to do that for 40 years, so
Ah,
I understand the whole concept. But you uh, you have this relationship. What are kind of maybe the three or so things that you really feel go into making up your relationship and keeping everything so positive?
ah, yes, sir. And Michael, I was so sad to hear about your late wife. I'm very sorry.
Well, like I tell people though, I need to continue to be a good kid because if I don't, I'm going to hear about it from her. She's up there monitoring somewhere.
I love that. Yes, sir. Yeah, our relationship is an interesting one because my wife and I spent so much of our initial time just getting to know each other. There was, we actually weren't together, and we both met each other at very independent stages of our lives. And it was something that it was almost tangible. I could feel that independence about her, and she could feel it about myself. And so we actually, we were just friends, and we just got to know each other. And so I do think that the bulk of our relationship, and I would say any real great relationship, has to be built on the foundation of honesty. And I'm
Hmm.
talking real honesty, showing who the real you is. And that requires a bit of bravery to be the real you and to talk about and say, hey, no subject is too taboo. We're going to talk about everything. And so I think that that's the first pillar. And the other two from that, I think are, they are products that rely heavily on honesty, right? So if your relationship if your foundation is built on honesty, one of the things that comes is more of a result of that. The second most important thing to me is laughter, right? Finding time to be silly. And, with being honest in your true self, there's a bit of silliness that comes with that naturally. And so lots and lots of laughter. I don't think that you can ever go wrong, and being a big kid and laughing all the
Yeah.
time. And the third most important thing to me is communication. And again, that is another product of honesty, discussing everything and often. It's I find it hard to hear when people have to schedule time for each other to sit down and just have a conversation. And that I can try to understand because I know that people get busy, but we just communication is such a giant pillar in our relationship that I couldn't imagine having to schedule time to sit down with my wife to get a few words in.
Yeah. I appreciate all three of those because they're very much a part of what made our marriage,
Oh,
I think, such a great one. And
yes.
communication is so important, and you have to do it all the time. And we liked talking to each other about anything. And as you pointed out, honesty and being open is absolutely crucial about whatever. Um,
Yeah.
and it's important to be able to have that deep of a relationship that you can talk about anything and not judge. And I think that's the other part of it. You communicate, but you don't judge the other person just because they are honest enough to tell you something that you didn't even think about.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
We had a podcast interview quite a while ago with a gentleman who lives back near where you live. And when he and his wife turned 40, he asked her, he said, so what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And she said, I want to adopt a daughter from China, which totally floored him. And he said, why? And she told him, well, they eventually did it. It became an adventure for them. And I think the daughter Mia is probably about 24, 25 years old. And a few years ago, she wanted to actually try to find her birth parents, which is hard in China, but they did. And he's written a book
Wow.
about it, which is really cool.
Oh, what's the name of the book?
I wish I could remember, but it is, um, if you still have the email I sent, I'll have to go find the episode,
Okay.
but it's, if you still have the email that I sent you, it's one of the episodes that I included.
Okay, I do. Excellent. Yeah, I'll have to make sure to go and watch that one and get the book. That sounds, some similarities there, just meeting parents and that kind of challenge. How fascinating.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, but he really worked hard at going through it all, and they agreed, and they went and they adopted a daughter, and then they adopted a second daughter. And I wish I could remember the name of the book right off, but it's been a long time. It's like episode um, 38 or something, and we're up at
Oh
episode
man.
277. So it's a while ago, but
Yeah.
it's a fascinating book. I haven't read the book. It wasn't available in a form I could read, but he told me all about it. So it was really
Oh.
fascinating to hear the story. Well, that happens. So you have gone through some physical challenges in your existence, haven't you?
Yeah, yes, sir. It was, towards the tail end of us leaving Europe. And yeah, I had suffered a really serious polytraumatic incident in Innsbruck, Austria.
Ah,
Yeah.
and what happened, if you want to talk about it?
Yeah, of course. I was snowboarding. We were at Ischgl. It's a ski resort that my wife and I loved and we cherished, and we'd been to it so many times, and it was a wonderful day, like so many of our days spent out there. And the snow was coming down, and we were just having a great time. And essentially on this run, that there's a literal fork in the road, and either you stay in the Austrian side or the other side allows you to go over to Switzerland, which is really neat. Isn't that something, being able to snowboard in two different places? And so I'm just really going, and we're moving because it's feeling good, and we're probably, probably 45 miles an hour. I think my friend who was with us had his GoPro, and he caught the whole thing on video for both good and
Mm.
bad. But as we're coming down this and I'm getting to that fork in the road, somebody yells at me, and I realize that I might be missing my turn. So I turn around to look, because I look ahead and I see the signs there, and the steel signage jutting out. And I see, okay, it's probably 15 feet ahead. And I turn around to look. And then as soon as I turn my head back forward, that's the basically the steel signs that were pointing out of the postage had hit me right underneath my right
Oh,
eye.
oh,
And it immediately caved my skull in and shattered it into about 14 pieces. Some of those pieces getting lodged into the front part of my brain. And so, immediately it knocks me unconscious, and my then lifeless body, I guess, and unflinching body goes into the pole, which was not covered. And so all of my ribs on my right side were broken, and a number of them went through my lung. My rotator cuff in my right shoulder was shattered, and I broke, or I fractured my spine as well. And so I was at the highest Glasgow coma index level that you can be, and again, due to my wife and her quick ability to act, she came down and she saw me and knew that something wasn't right. And just, this just shows just her brain and how incredible it is. She was able to not only call the right number, which isn't 911, it's 112 over there. You
yeah.
call the number, and she got somebody on the line, and she was able to, despite language challenges and barriers there, she was able to get some folks over to pick me up via helicopter.
Mm.
And
Well, when
so,
you do it right, don't you?
yeah, I guess so.
Anyway, go ahead.
Oh no. So the helicopter, it came and picked me up and they had to resuscitate me in the back of this helicopter, a few, who knows how long. The doctors weren't sure. But either a minute the other way. And we wouldn't be having this conversation. I heard this so many times during my recovery from my doctors. And so that sent me into a coma. And
Mm.
I was in a coma for 7 days in Innsbruck, Austria, in their ICU unit for their hospital over there. And when I finally did wake up, I was blind in my right eye, and not because of the damage to my eye. My eye is actually completely healthy. You wouldn't, if you could see me, Michael, you wouldn't believe it, but the eye is completely healthy, and it's just the specific damage done to my brain that's left me now permanently blind.
In your right eye.
Yes, sir.
Now, do you see still well from your left eye?
Yeah, left. I mean, I didn't see super well before I had contacts and glasses my whole
Yeah.
life. So,
Can you
but
can you drive?
I can drive. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That was one of the, part of the recovery process.
The brain is such an adaptable thing, and it's great that
Amazing.
you can do that. Well, so what got you through all of that?
It, this was this is one of those things. We talk about positive adaptability a little bit. And I think when I think about positive adaptability, I think about it in three different ways is how I've been able to sum it up. I think it's centered around three parts. And positive adaptability, part one is gratitude. Gratitude. How can I reflect? What can I be thankful for? And as I was in that hospital and I woke up, obviously the first thing I'm thankful for is, oh my God, I'm alive. The next section of gratitude was, okay, I think I have, I know who I am. I have my memories, even though these doctors are saying you might not have this, you might not have that. They're unsure, but that's all that's going through my brain at the time is how can I, what am I, I'm grateful about all of these different things. And then the next part of positive adaptability is really intention. So I have gratitude for everything that I still have, all of this stuff. But now what's my intention? And I knew that my intention in that bed before I had walked, before I had really moved at all, before I, knew whether or not I could, it was that I was going to get better. That was my intention. Whatever that looked like, even if it was accepting this new normal, right? And so it was, this was a big intention. That's a big blanket intention. I guess, for my other agile methodology industry people, we could call that the epic to the user stories. My intention was to get better. And then after that, it was action. So, first reflecting and saying, hey, I'm grateful. Second was what do I want to do? And then third was action. First step and all that I could do really, Michael, was to listen to the doctors, listen to people, listen to my wife who was visiting. And then it was basic things after that. It was okay, how do I eat? How do I get nutrients back into my body? If I can't walk, can I practice sitting up in the hospital bed? And so I would, kind of sit up and do what I could and move different parts of my body. And then it was, okay, the next iterative thing, how do I walk? At first, I couldn't even walk a few steps to the
Hmm.
bathroom. And then it was just iterative progress of, okay, you made it to this tile last time, Kiefer. Can you make it a little bit further? Can you make it a little bit further? And then it was memory tests, all the way up to just this summer. I did my first 5K that I've done, since my accident. And so I did a 5K this summer.
How long
Um,
ago was the accident?
the accident was I'm sorry, January of 2022, January
Okay.
14th.
Wow. Okay, so you'll be coming up on 2 years soon,
Yes, sir.
but you did the 5K.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, how did you learn about this concept of positive adaptability?
It's it's something that I'd never heard it until I think I started doing a lot of introspection during my recovery. There was a 3 month part of my recovery where I didn't really get up. and I didn't really do anything, my doctor said that, hey, you just need to be still, be there, do some cognitive, there are great applications out there. I used a couple of them to train my brain and help develop my new synapses because, Michael, as I'm sure when your brain gets damaged, your brain never heals. It just
Hmm.
creates new roads to travel down.
Right.
And so, utilizing that, I spent a lot of time in my own mind, just thinking. And positive adaptability was something that, I don't know if I coined it, but it's certainly going to be the name of the book that I hope to put out in 2025 because nobody's taken the title yet. So it's something that I, I found that was the way that I approached my life. And it was even that way before my accident. This is how I've gotten from here to here at almost every challenge and major obstacle of my life. It's not just resiliency or optimism. It's positive adaptability. And when I said it, I wrote it down in my phone and I started writing ideas for books and I started, more fleshing out this concept that I hadn't really been introduced to, but that I think just makes a lot of sense in the way a lot of people navigate their challenges and obstacles. And you yourself, I believe, are a wonderfully shining candidate of positive adaptability.
Well, I think that all too often we focus on so many negative things. We focus on why we can't do stuff as opposed
Yeah.
to how we make it happen. And
Mhm.
there's no reason that we can't do whatever we feel we can do. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean that and again, not to be in a punny way, but in a positive way. We
Yeah.
really can be positive. We really can learn to adapt and do so many things that we don't think we can. And unfortunately, I think all too often we get taught that we can't do things. We can't really be as malleable and as adaptable as we really can be.
Right.
And it gets to be a real challenge. So you you just suddenly created this concept. If I were you, I'd go copyright it somewhere and that way you've got it for the book.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good feedback. And, it's something that I'll have to look into. But yeah, positive adaptability is truly, ever since I said it, it's something that I bring up often and I try to, the folks that I get to interact with and the way I get to work with people, try to implement these things in every which way, not only in personal life, but professionally too.
So just sort of out of curiosity, what would you say is the difference between positive adaptability and resilience? Because resilience is, of course, something that many of us experience. We're resilient because we overcome adversity and so on. But what's the difference between positive adaptability and resilience?
Absolutely. And that was something, had sat and dwelled on for a while. And when we think about resilience, we think about typically elasticity. We think about the ability of someone to snap or bounce back from something. Maybe it's from adversity, maybe it's just a large challenge. But resiliency, in my opinion, it doesn't really imply that, a positive choice was really made for maybe a bad pattern. And so, the simplest example I can think of is, somebody walks through the door and maybe they get punched in the face, right? And they could say, I'm going to be resilient about this. I'm going to do the same thing tomorrow and do it again and again. And you can take a lot of punches, right? But it doesn't necessarily mean we solved a problem. But we could take that and expand it as far as, someone might say, well, my country has showed true resilience regarding this war. And maybe they had, but maybe no one had ever questioned if was that war being fought for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Were we incredibly resilient, but did we was it for the right purpose? And so for me, resiliency defines someone's ability or an entity's ability to bounce back, but positive adaptability can provide us with really positive posturing for how we land advantageously.
Um, okay. Go into that a little bit more if you would.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that just talking about essentially positive adaptability is the heading. It is, it's not only saying, hey, I'm choosing to look at this positively and be resilient about it, but this is a heading for where I need to go. This is the direction for where I want to take this. And I think that that stems back into kind of what positive adaptability means to me. And it's just so much more than just optimism.
Yeah. Well, it clearly is because it's not enough to be optimistic, but it's taking that and deciding on a direction, deciding on a choice, and then following through with that until either you find that you made a great choice
Yeah.
or you find that, well, maybe that wasn't such a good choice. And what we need to do is alter course a little bit, which gets
Yeah.
back to the adaptability part of it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's, when I think about it and how I would describe it to others, and just now that we're talking about that and have kind of centered it around optimism is, so if, for example, we take these three pillars of positive adaptability: gratitude, intention, and action, and we think about it from the point of optimism, gratitude, and looking at the old optimistic phrase of the glass is half full, right? So when I think about gratitude, first we say, well, I'm grateful for water. Okay,
There you
excellent.
are.
We are grateful for water. But then when we think about intention, okay, well, why are we grateful for this water? What is our intention? Is it to have more water? So then my question might be, how do we find a stream? Is the question, is my intention to make it look like we have more water? Then maybe my intention then is to find a smaller cup, right? Or is my intention to share the water? So then how can I get multiple cups so that we're all sharing this? And then action is carrying out that action. So it's it's optimism, it's resilience plus.
Makes perfect sense. And the whole idea, again, is to really learn more about yourself. And I talk a lot about introspection, spending time at the end of the day. What worked? What didn't work? And even when something worked, can I make it better? But really looking at yourself in a positive light and recognizing that there really isn't such a thing as failure. It's another opportunity. And the failure is, well, this didn't work the way I expected it to work. That doesn't mean it was a failure. That
Right.
doesn't mean I should be defeated. It means, all right, what's next, sports fans? And how do we move forward from here?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
And I think that that's what most people really miss in the whole process is taking the time to analyze and look at yourself. And you're your best teacher. Nobody else can teach you like you can teach you. And so we should look at what goes on around us and what we do and look at it in the light of how can I make it better?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, it comes down to just folks and their practical strategies and sort of exercises that I guess they can develop to sustain that kind of mindset.
Yeah. So have you read any books or um, encountered other kinds of things that have really helped you move forward on this whole concept of positive adaptability?
Oh, yeah, the first one that comes to mind, of course, is my wife, my better half, right? So just being so instrumental in our transparent communication and a partner and a resource and a grounding point for everything that I do. Sometimes I might just come out and blurt out the most ridiculous idea she's ever heard, but she'll say, "Well, Kiefer, that was here. How do we make it here?" Or she might tell me, "Kiefer, that's crazy." So, she is the
Wives can
number
do that, and
one.
that's fair.
They keep us grounded, and so yeah, I couldn't have imagined a better partnership, and I love having her in my life to be that person. And I would say that on top of someone to share experiences with and to mentor and do these things, I have had a significant nudge in my life from an executive at our company, Agile Defense, and his name is Lonnie Nichols. And he's, despite all of his busyness as an executive to our company and being a great family man, he's been, a great guide. He's nudged me to be better. He actually challenged me to get on this with you today, Michael, because at first I said the same thing I think a lot of your folks do is, I don't have a story to tell. And he said, Kiefer, I think it's even more important that you do this, right? And so he challenged me to do this, and he's been, challenging me to just be better in every way that I can. And he also eats, breathes, and sleeps, this mantra of listen first.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that, and I've applied that in my life. And he's turned me on to a number of books that I've read, and outside of that, some resources that I've implemented that help me more with positive adaptability. I have this great gift my wife bought me called the 5-minute journal. And every single page, it essentially has an incredible quote at the top. It's small, it's short. It asks you to list 3 things you're grateful for, 3 things that would make today great, a daily affirmation. Then you get at the end of the day, at night, when you do your retrospective, you look through and you list 3 highlights of your day, and then what you learned. And so that's been an incredibly wonderful, thing to have in my life and to implement. And it always allows me, as you said, Michael, to go back and reflect and see if I could have made something a little bit better. And I love that.
And even if you can't, you may tomorrow.
Exactly. Yeah, you write about it the next day. But, outside of that, I got, Ted Lasso for it being a fictional television show. I couldn't imagine a more positively adaptable character out there that I still, every time I watch the show, it's only 3 seasons long, I continue to learn something new that I can apply to my life, to others, the lives of others. And that's been a really great show.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a book out there called Positive Intelligence. And
Yeah.
that's a book that helps us identify, our saboteur thoughts and our saboteur emotions and how to live our lives and mitigate some of those things.
Well, one thing that I think is coming out of this is I would love to have your friend from Natural Defense to come on the podcast as well. How do we get him on?
Oh man, I think he'd be happy to do it, and he's got an incredible story as well, and he's shared some of that with me. So I'll definitely reach out to him and see if I can, hey, you challenged me, and now I
Yeah.
challenge you.
Give him my email address and let's touch base. I would love to. We're always looking for more guests on Unstoppable Mindset. And, as I said, everyone has a story to tell. And it's neat when people really understand that they have a story to tell and want to tell the story. And,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, and I know I'm doing this during the podcast, but you might think about doing a digital story about positive adaptability and copyright it. And that also starts to get the message out. Maybe you do a few of those and that becomes part of the book.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And this is really, Michael, this is kind of phase 1 for future implementations and things like that. And it's establishing that as your personal brand. I'm sure that you'd be a great resource and have a lot of advice for, hey, this is how you do this. This is how you bring your message forward, because you've got such a great one that you're sharing with the world.
Love to help in any way that we can.
Yeah.
So can you suggest some exercises and some different things that people can do to kind of help create for themselves this whole idea of a positive adaptability mindset?
Ah, yeah, absolutely. We touched on some of this a little bit earlier, and I think that some of the stuff that you said it's amazing how it, somebody who's been through it and who has it, you get it already, and you've already said some of the things. But there are 4 things that I think about, and it's the first one is practicing honesty. And as we talked about earlier, and you had said, Michael, that the hardest part of honesty is with ourselves. It's that introspection. And I know that can be challenging for a lot of people. And the first thing I've had folks throw at me is, well, how can I be honest, with about this or about this? And if you need some help, there are resources out there to get it. But we have to practice honesty. And the first time that we do, it's got to be with ourselves.
Yeah.
And as you said, ourselves are our best teacher. So number 1, practice honesty. Number 2, listen to understand, not respond. Listening to understand. And that's so challenging and such a big deal in every aspect of life. The third I would say is as we've talked about a little bit, is reflect and be grateful. That You know what best, there's an expression out there that's, you know what the best day of the year is? The best day of the year is today.
Yeah.
And that's true every single day. We can either make today our masterpiece or our calamity. And everything is a result of the choices that we get to make. So reflecting and be grateful is the third. And finally, the fourth one that's, I think we miss a lot is that we need to think more about we and less about me.
Yeah.
And I like to call this the main character syndrome. Society and different things, we think that we're the only person in the story, a lot of folks. And, even, or if it's just, me and my wife, it's my family, it's my versus our, we. And when I think about some great stories out there, any great story, right? The first one that comes to my mind, because I love the fiction so much, but Harry Potter, right?
Yeah.
The,
Of
the name
course.
implies that it's a main character, right? Harry Potter is the main character. But when we think about that, in Harry Potter, without Dumbledore, without the, friendship of Ron and Hermione, heck, even without his opposition of Voldemort, right?
Yeah.
There are so many characters in the story. And it turns out when we really think about it, Harry Potter was not a main character at all. He's a character among so many. And we were just lucky enough to learn about just one of them, right? Imagine hearing all of the stories about the rest of those people in those books.
Well, and all of the books are Harry Potter
Yeah,
and I think that's really important because we are
exactly.
telling it from his standpoint. So he's in a sense a main character from the standpoint of we're hearing his story, but it really is about everyone. It's an incredible world. Now there's
Yeah.
a new series, by the way, the James Potter series, and there are at least 5 books in that series. So it's about Harry's son at Hogwarts, and there's some really great twists in those. So if you haven't read those are another series to look at.
Oh, I had no idea.
Well, I don't want to give anything away except you know, let's just say McGonagall doesn't want to and isn't going to be the school mistress at Hogwarts forever, but you'll never guess who becomes the new schoolmaster at the end of the first book or the beginning of the second book, and I'm not going to give it away.
Oh my
You will
gosh.
never guess it. It
I
is
can't believe.
nobody that you can think of. I will tell you that right
Okay.
now.
All right. I'm gonna think about it and I'll send you an email, for a guess. That's
but
incredible. Thank you.
but it's a good series. But the point really is that this world is composed of all of us, and we're all part of the same world under the same God. And we've got to start recognizing that it isn't just us, ourselves. Um, I always believe in doing things as a team. When I wrote Thunderdog, my story of the World Trade Center and working with a guide dog, I had the great honor to work with someone else, and it was a team effort. We both worked, we both wrote, we collaborated, we both edited, and then when I did Running with Roselle, which was really for kids, um, although more adults buy it than children because it's not a picture book. But again, I collaborated, and we're just getting ready to do a new book that the book is written. It's now in the hands of the publisher, and the publisher's actually already put out a pre-order link to, I guess, gauge interest. But that book is entitled Live Like a Guide Dog, Stories of a Blind Man, His Dog, and His Dogs, about adversity, um, moving forward in faith, and well, no, I keep blanking out on the whole sub title of the book, but it's adversity, overcoming challenges, and moving forward in faith. And
Okay.
it's fun, and it's about learning to control fear, learning
Yeah.
that in reality, we all can control the things that happen to us, at least how we react to it. We don't need to be blinded by fear. And so the book is really about that, because I talked for 22 years as a speaker about not being afraid going out of the World Trade Center on September 11th. But what I haven't done is taught other people that you can do the same thing. And so it's a lot of fun to do.
How powerful.
But um, it is about us, not me. And
Yeah.
the writing is better because it's us, and everything we do is better because it's us. There's no I in team, and there's a reason for that.
So I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it takes a village. None of us get anywhere we are by ourselves.
Right. So for you, besides writing the book, what's next in the world to do?
Next in the world. And, I think this is one of those catalysts for me, Michael. This is one of those things that challenged me to say, hey, and I had to start thinking about it. What do I have the ability to do right now? Where can I make an impact? And right now, the answer, for me, it's the internet, work, and home, right?
There
Home
you
is
go.
the easy one. So I listen, I reflect. If you're kind to everyone, no harm is going to come from that. Live your personal life that way, and that's what I'm going to do to make an impact there. The internet, this one, opportunities like this, Michael, getting on here with a great person like yourself and being able to express and tell some of my story, and growing my personal brand. And this is something that my wife, I happen to be married to someone who specializes in this field. So I'm sure that she's going to help me put my personal brand together and grow the audience through the creation of content and media channels and things like that. And then utilizing people-centric principles around business agility. This is how, I can spread this stuff throughout work. The business agility and everything at its core is all people-centric. And again, it's all shaped around how are we bettering communication, psychological safety, trust. A lot of these things we're talking about already that I'm so passionate about. There are now frameworks that I can use that are educational frameworks and say, hey, this works. This is how I can make people's lives at their jobs better and make teams better, which is really pretty wonderful. And so I can utilize that in the case studies that I've written to share my knowledge and my thoughts at conferences with other Agile practitioners. And I'm doing a little bit of that this week, just being online with a bunch of other peers for the Advanced Certified Scrum Master and continuing my education in that regard. And then, as you had said, by 2025, I hope and I plan to publish a book by the name of Positive Adaptability. And so that's if it isn't taken yet, I got to get out there and copyright it, as you said.
Cool. Um, it is clearly really exciting to see all the things that you're looking to do. And I'm really excited about it. And I'm excited about what you're looking to do. And I think, there's a lot that you'll accomplish as you continue to move forward. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about what you do. So you got to keep us posted. If people want to reach out to you and make contact, maybe have their digital story told and so on, how do they do that?
Absolutely. So our email address is hi at Tiki Design Production, or I'm sorry, it's hello at tikidesignproductions.com.
And
And
Tiki
so
is
folks,
TIKI.
yes, sir. So
Okay.
hello at tikidesignproductions.com. And that's, yeah, where, we'd love to bring people on and tell your digital story. But
Cool.
you can find us also, on all of the social media stuff, either under Tiki Design, which is our company, or Tiki Tube, which is, the viral social media accounts that my wife manages. And, she's gotten a lot of following there.
Well, I hope great success comes your way with all of it and that you get a lot of visibility. I hope people liked what they heard today and will reach out. Um, and I want to thank you for being here and I want to thank you for listening. All of you are really so well appreciated. We value your input and your comments on the podcast. Please keep them coming and reach out to Kiefer and touch base with him. Again, I'd love to hear from you. You're welcome to email me at michaelhi, at accessibe.com, or go to our podcast page, www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. And wherever you're listening, please give us a 5-star rating. We appreciate that and value it greatly. And we value your comments when you do those ratings as well. So please do that. So we really love getting the chance to talk to so many people. I really love having had the chance to talk today, Kiefer, with you. And I want to just thank you one more time for being here with us and giving us so many great insights and ideas.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm grateful for you and your time today. Thank you. I couldn't be happier. And this is the first nudge of many into the future. So thank you.